It was a chilly night in early March. This happened a couple years ago now. I had just gotten home from work. I was working late that night, so it was close to midnight by the time I walked through the door. I was beyond exhausted. I wanted nothing more than to crack open a freezing cold beer and throw my feet up on the couch. So that's exactly what I did. Alcohol always tastes better after a hard day's work. I didn't even turn on the TV immediately. I just sat there on the couch with my eyes closed and my feet elevated, trying to ignore the nagging thoughts about how stressful my life was. I remember getting frustrated while flipping through the channels because nothing was catching my eye. After sifting through for another few minutes, I ultimately gave up and opted to enjoy my beer in silence. Like everything else in my life, peace and quiet was apparently too much to ask for, because not 10 seconds later, all the lights in my house simultaneously shut off. You know that slightly fuzzy popping sound that comes a split second before everything shuts off? Yeah, there's nothing I hate more than hearing that noise. For whatever reason, our house had a tendency to lose power every so often. Now that I think about it, it still does. Anyway, my first reaction was to step outside and see if any of the neighboring houses were affected. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, trying to preserve any heat that I might not be able to get back should I fail to restore the power. It was late, but I remember seeing at least one house on my block with their lights on, which confirmed that my house was the problem. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that this headache would definitely spoil whatever pleasure I was hoping to salvage from the night. I turned back to go inside, but when I turned the handle on the front door, it wouldn't budge. I froze, confused at first. I tried the handle a few more times, but it was definitely locked. What the hell was going on? I banged on the door and called my wife's name, thinking maybe she had woken up without me realizing. There was no answer. I tried to peer through the glass, but it was still pitch black in there. I ran around to the back. That door was locked too. I started panicking. My wife had a tendency to leave doors unlocked, so it was weird that the back door would be locked in the first place. I ran around to the side of the house to check the breaker, and I froze in my tracks. My hose, which I knew for a fact had been coiled, was laying in the grass just below the breaker box. The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had cut the power intentionally. Without thinking, I sprinted to the nearest window and desperately looked inside one more time. This time, I was able to make out two flashlights swinging around wildly in the dark, as if two people were rummaging through my house. They were. I knew they were stealing shit. I was infuriated. The nerve of someone to do this while I was literally home. I reached into my pocket to call the police, only to realize that I had left my phone on the couch. After cursing under my breath, I told myself I'd just run to the neighbor's house and borrow his phone. As I started making my way to the nearest house, another, more sinister thought hit me. My wife was still inside. She was probably asleep, vulnerable to whoever was in the house. I couldn't leave her there, even for another minute. I sprinted back to my house and frantically grabbed some loose rocks from the yard. I started chucking them at our bedroom window, hoping to wake her up. After the third rock, she opened the window. Before she had a chance to say anything, I quietly told her what was happening and instructed her to hide in our closet. Her head disappeared immediately. She didn't ask questions. I then sprinted to my neighbor's house and banged on the door. I explained what was going on as quickly as possible, and then I used his phone to call the police. I waited on his porch, praying that my wife would be okay. The police eventually arrived, and I ran out to one of the cars, explaining the situation as best I could. They barged into the house, but by then, it was too late. The back door was wide open, and whoever had broken in was gone, with too many of our valuables to count. My wife was more shaken than I was, and understandably so. What she told me and the police made me angry at myself for not doing a better job at protecting her. To this day, I'll never forgive myself for leaving her in the house with potential murderers. Apparently, mere seconds after I instructed her to hide, she heard someone kick the bedroom door open. The person walked into the room and cocked a gun. He stood there motionlessly for a few seconds, clearly listening for anyone in the room. She said she had never been more terrified in her entire life. I believe the intruders heard me throwing the rocks at the window. The scariest part is that we still live in this house, and we're not planning on moving out anytime soon. Sometimes I think about what could have happened had I not stepped outside for those brief moments.